Join From Beer to the Bible every week as Ervin Lee and co-host Sarah Oliveira McDonald warn others of the consequences of drug and alcohol addiction by being the voice of faith-based recovery. Every week, Ervin and Sarah help people get access to the treatment and counseling they so desperately need. They explore the depths of addiction and give practical life examples of how to recover and develop a new rhythm of living. The show is gritty, authentic, and simply raw while being rooted in the love, faith, and hope of God. Welcome to From Beer to the Bible.
Welcome. I'm your host, Ervin Lee of From Beer to the Bible, and I got my good friend and gateway brother, Mike Fitzgerald, with me today. Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Hey, I am super excited to have you, and you have such a rich and robust testimony that we want to get right into it. And I want you to introduce our theme for today.
Yeah, kind of the theme that I've been thinking and that I've seen and realized since I've been in recovery and been in a relationship with Christ is that God, He loved me so much. He pursued me before I even knew Him as I was still a sinner. And you know, I believe that we are created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And that's just been my theme. So while I was out there drinking and using, God pursued me. And I think you'll see that in my story.
Yeah. One of the things that drew me to you and your testimony is that fact that although it felt like at times you were running away from the Lord was always actively busy about you and pursuing you.
Most definitely. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So talk to us and tell us when and how did you fall into addiction?
Well, it started when I was very young. You know, it's ironic. I just saw the Jesus Revolution movie the other weekend, and that was the era that I kind of grew up in.
Okay.
And so all that is very familiar to me, except I didn't come to Christ at that time, but that was all going on. But, you know, I grew up in a middle-class family in Sacramento, California. I was just a normal kid early on, you know, involved in sports and things like that. Yeah. My parents, we didn't go to church, though. Church and God just wasn't part of our life, and they were not believers, and just kind of stayed away from that. And so I just grew up, did that kind of stuff. And then by the time I got to junior high school, like 12, 13 years old, I got exposed to drugs and alcohol. And you know, at that time, you know, you're changing as a young man, and I was very uncomfortable in social situations around girls, all that kind of stuff. You know, I just felt unique and different than everybody else. And when I tried drugs, I liked them. You know, I started off with marijuana and what they called beans, which was speed at the time. You know, and I started doing that. And then a little bit later started with alcohol, because you can't really get alcohol too easily at 12 and 13 years old. But that quickly came into the picture.
What role in your active addiction, what role did your friends play? And then where was your family as you were starting to fall into addiction?
Yeah, you know, it seemed to me everybody was doing drugs and alcohol. That's just the environment I grew up in. You know, it almost seemed like the people that didn't do that were the ones that were kind of odd. You know, it just seemed like everybody was doing it. So all my friends were doing it. We'd go out on weekends and get high, and, you know, somebody's brother or sister would buy alcohol, and, you know, older brother and sister, and we'd get drunk. So that just kind of went on. My parents didn't really realize. I'm sure I came home, you know, drunk one night or two or something. So they knew something was going on, but it just wasn't, you know, it's just, okay, kids being kids early on. You know, and then it just kind of progressed all into high school, and it got more, and there was more drugs, different kinds of drugs. So basically anything that got me high, you know, I was ingesting, and I loved it. For the most part, you know, it worked for a while until probably the latter part of high school, I started getting into trouble.
Okay.
And so then it started to become a problem. First, it's fun. Then it becomes fun and problems, and it becomes problems and, more serious problems and that kind of thing. So that progression and that escalation definitely just kept going. Yeah. And I always had alcohol through it all.
It's amazing to me how it starts out and it's so much fun and it's working.
Yeah.
And then talk about how it stops working. And then outside of all the fun, here comes the avalanche of the consequences. And you go from wanting it to needing it. Talk about that progression.
Well, so let's see. I think probably the things that started going wrong was school grades started to, I basically stopped going and stopped trying. So my grades suffered.
Yeah.
My parents had always said, if you don't go to college, you're never going to amount to anything. So my nature and my attitude was, okay, I'm not going to college. I'm going to prove you wrong. So I was always kind of anti-authority, if somebody tells me what to do, I'm going to prove them wrong. So that was kind of my attitude. And, so I graduated high school, but of course I didn't go on to college, and I started working, and it just kind of escalated. At 19 years old, I got in a car wreck. I rolled my truck with a friend in it, and we landed upside down in a river off of a levee road, beer cans strewn everywhere all over the street. So I got arrested then at 19. My friend was injured. I was injured. I didn't have to go to jail because we went to the hospital. But after that, I was arrested for drunk driving, and the judge put me into an inpatient alcohol rehabilitation program.
Yeah.
So what's ironic is, I got there and I couldn't believe that I was there. I didn't understand either. I was 19 years old. I wasn't even old enough to drink alcohol, so how could I possibly be an alcoholic? That was my kind of thinking. You know?
It's amazing what we can tell ourselves.
Yeah. So I went through that. As soon as I got out, started drinking and using again.
Okay.
Yeah.
When and at what point did you ever say to yourself, perhaps this isn't working, this drinking and drugging for me isn't working?
Yeah, it was probably... From that point, it was probably 5 years later or so, 5 years further into the progression. So I'm in my mid-20s.
Yeah.
I had a job, and I would go to work regardless, whether I was hungover, whether I was high, whatever. I'd still show up.
Yeah.
And eventually I just stopped going. It got in the way of my drinking and doing drugs, and so I lost that job. I started getting sick and tired. Sometimes you'll hear the saying, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and that was happening. Everything in my life, my relationships, my family, everybody started just kind of moving away from me. They didn't want to have anything to do with me at that point. So that's kind of when I saw it. So I put myself into a rehabilitation program, an inpatient alcohol program at that point, just because I didn't know what else to do, and life wasn't working. Nothing was going right, and I was getting in more and more trouble. So I went through again. This time a little bit different kind of perspective, although I tried to do everything on my own, and that doesn't work.
That doesn't work.
Yeah.
Did at any point, where was Jesus? Where was anybody trying to help you and maybe lead you to Christ and help you say, hey, look, I think that one of the things that's missing is the good Lord, church, and fellowship. Was anybody trying to come alongside you that way? That
came a little later. So the people that I hung around with did not have a relationship with Christ, and the people that I was around, but there was one friend that I had, would ask questions like, do you believe in heaven and hell? And I would say stupid things like, I believe in hell because I'm living hell on earth right now, just because of the pain and, the desperation and things had progressed to. But I never really considered, going to church or, or anything in a relationship with God. So it just progressed. I got to the point where I couldn't work anymore.
Yeah.
I didn't have any money. Nobody wanted to be around me. I was injecting drugs into my arms at that point, so it had progressed down the road, and I didn't have anywhere to live or to sleep, and I ended up living in an abandoned car that was off at the end of a dead-end road.
Yeah.
And I would sleep in that car, and that's kind of where everything took me now as a long progression.
Yeah.
By the time I was 31 years old is when that happened. So
Wow. So at 31, you're living in this car. Now tell us, at what point does Christ show up?
Well, it was kind of ironic. So, I'm in there in the back seat of the car. It's probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm drinking from my bottle that somehow I managed to get at this point. And I don't know, it was just, I can still remember it and picture it in my mind to this day, many years later. And I just kind of sat up and very erect, and I just had this moment of clarity, and I just cried out, God, please help me. Just like that. And tears were, streaming down my cheeks. And, I guess I just got to that point where I tried everything. I tried everything to do it on my own. I tried to do everything on my own, and nothing worked. I just had all the shame, the guilt, the fear, the desperation that just goes around, with addiction. And that was just a desperate cry out to God. And, so then at that point, the next morning, somebody came knocking on the window of the car door, I kind of wondering what's going on, and it was a person that I knew, and she said, I'm going to take you to the hospital. And at that point, I was so sick, I didn't really care. I'd given up hope on everything. And so she took me to the hospital, and she had arranged with my parents, who were back east at the time, this was in California, to get me into a drug alcohol program. And so I can remember walking up the steps to the hospital, drinking the last of my pint of vodka as I'm walking up the steps, and tossing it into the garbage can right by the door there. And so I went in for the 3rd time.
Wow. And so you go in, you get help, and then you continue as God has been pursuing you. Now, do you turn and pursue the good Lord as well? So all this time, like I mentioned early on, is God had been pursuing me. There is so many times that I should not be here at all. In fact, there was one time in the mid-'80s that I was working temporarily for a moving company in San Francisco, and I was working with a crew of 4 guys, and we were doing an overtime office move, so just humping furniture around, moving floor to floor for this company. And the guys that I was with, they always partnered with 2 people, so I was partnered with one guy, and these other 2 guys were kind of our crew chiefs or whatever. But the one guy I was with was mad at the other guys because they were not doing the work, and him and I were humping the furniture, and they were kind of just talking to the girls in the office, that kind of thing. So he was getting real upset, and in the freight elevator, he was doing these, martial arts kicks and stuff like that. So this all kind of went on. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but it was probably like 3-4 months later that I found out. So this was Charles Ng, who was one of the most notorious serial killers in California. Wow.
And he and Leonard Lake had a torture chamber thing down in Calaveras County, but I had been partnering with Charlie for about 4 weeks on these overtime moves, and we'd ridden the metro into work day and day, every other day. And these 2 guys, I found out later, showed up missing. And then over time, it ended up that they were actually killed down in Calaveras County. So the 4 of us guys, in this
these were guys you were working with.
So I know God had a hand in that. I rode the metro with Charlie every day into work. And so things like that, driving, blacking out, and, just situations I got myself into.
Yeah.
I certainly should not be here. So I know God was watching out for me. I believe the Holy Spirit led me to the point where I was willing to just cry out in desperation, God, please help me.
Yeah.
And as I know now, God is always faithful. And he stepped in at that point in time, and he's never left. It's just kind of exponentially increased his presence in my life.
Well, to me, the greatest prayers sometimes are the shortest, but they engage our soul and our heart and our whole being, our spirit, when we cry out for that help. Because many times I've heard people in addiction say that same prayer. Pretty much that's what I said. Like, Lord, help me. Lord, come get me. And it's amazing to see him answer those prayers, because we have our whole being engaged in them. Now,
what's interesting, though, is like you said, it was just that guttural kind of, almost groan, God, please help me. The ironic thing was I had no relationship with God up to that point. I don't even know where that came from.
That's the amazing grace of the Lord. Now, so you are now in a place where you're open to receiving all that Christ offers. So talk about that a little bit of, hey, you get out, you're in your recovery, in the journey of finding and building the relationship with Christ.
Yeah, so that was an inpatient program as well. And thank God, my final one. And so I was like 10 to 12 days in detox because I was so sick. And I think typically it's 5-6 days, something like that. But I stayed longer, and then it was a 30-day program. So I had nowhere to go, right? I'm homeless when I go in there, and I asked them, what am I supposed to do? I can't, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. And they said, well, we'll give you a list of, halfway houses and places you can call and see if you can get in one, right? So I got the list, and I called, like 5 days before I was supposed to be released. And I started calling everybody. Nobody had a bed. Nobody had any room. And then one of the guys that I had called me back on the very last day. And he said, hey, Mike, you called me and asked if we had a room at this recovery home. If you want, I did have a bed just come open. So why don't you come interview? So I went there and interviewed. This gentleman was a Christian brother. He was an alcoholic himself, recovering alcoholic, and ran a program through the Catholic Charities and ran this halfway house. And he said, if you want a bed, if you really want to get sober, I have a bed down in the basement. There's certain things that you have to do, and do you want it? And I said, you bet, I'll take it. And that turned out to be just an amazing experience. And obviously it was a God thing.
It normally is a God thing. And Mike, we're going to have you back to finish the part of, hey, this is what the lie I believe from the enemy. This is where I spiral. And then I met Christ. And we're going to talk more on the other side about what your life is like now, right? So to all of our viewers who are excited to hear part 2, you're going to have to tune in for part 2 between Mike and I. But while you are awaiting that, please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And please continue to support us at FromBeerToTheBible.com. That's FromBeerToTheBible.com. May God richly bless you. And please join us next week for part 2 with my friend Mike.
Awesome.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's From Beer to the Bible. Make sure to tune in next week when Ervin and Sarah gift you with even more addiction recovery information. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And remember, we're always there for you.